I still remember the exact sound his suitcase wheels made against the dorm hallway tile, a rhythmic clatter that stopped right outside my door. I remember because I was sitting on the bottom bunk, half unpacked, telling myself that whoever walked through that door was just going to be a stranger I'd learn to tolerate for 9 months. I did not expect him to walk in, drop his bag, look at me, and say, "Oh, thank God, you don't look like a serial killer," before laughing at his own joke like it was the funniest thing he'd ever said. His name was Roman Ashworth. I didn't know yet that it would become the name I thought before every other thought, the name I'd write and erase in the corner of notebook margins, the name that would eventually feel less like a name and more like a place I lived. That first afternoon, he filled the room the way certain people fill rooms. Not loudly, exactly, but completely. He talked while he unpacked, narrating his own life like it was a documentary I hadn't asked for and somehow wanted more of. He told me about his hometown, his dog, his complicated relationship with his older brother, his theory that cafeteria pizza was secretly better than real pizza. I laughed more in that first hour than I had in the entire summer before. "You're quiet," he said eventually, flopping onto his own bed across the room, propping his chin on his hands to look at me. "Is that a personality thing or a first day thing?" "Bit of both," I admitted. "Cool. I talk enough for both of us anyway." He grinned, and something about that grin, easy, unguarded, aimed directly at me like I already mattered, settled into my chest, and stayed there. I didn't think anything of it then. Why would I have? We were 18, freshly moved into a cinder block room that smelled like fresh paint and somebody else's cologne, and Roman Ashworth was simply the most effortlessly likable person I had ever shared oxygen with. Everyone liked him. By the end of week 1, people I'd never met were saying hello to me in the hallway just because I lived with him. He had that gravity, the kind that pulled a whole floor of strangers into orbit without trying. I was not, by any stretch, in that same category. I was Elian Voss, decent at listening, unremarkable at parties, the guy who nodded along in group projects and went home early. I had spent most of high school assuming that being invisible was safer than being seen, because being seen meant somebody might look closely enough to notice the thing about me I hadn't said out loud to a single living person. Not to my parents, not to my best friend back home, not even fully to myself, if I'm honest. I'd folded it up so small and buried it so deep that most days I could almost convince myself it wasn't there at all. Rooming with Roman did not make that easier. It started small. The way he'd flop onto my bed, uninvited, to show me something on his phone, his shoulder pressed warm against mine, his laugh close enough that I could feel it more than hear it. The way he'd walk around the room in just sweatpants after a shower, toweling his hair, completely unbothered, while I suddenly developed an intense interest in whatever was on my laptop screen. The way he remembered things, my coffee order, the fact that I got quiet on Sundays because Sundays used to be the day my grandfather called before he passed, the exact way I liked my desk organized, even though he called it borderline diagnosable. Nobody had ever paid that much attention to me before. It was terrifying in a way I didn't have language for yet. "You're staring," he said one night in October, not even looking up from his textbook. We were both supposedly studying, sprawled across our respective beds with the desk lamp throwing long shadows across the ceiling. "I'm not staring," I said too fast. "Elian." He looked up then, one eyebrow raised, that half-smile already forming. "You've been staring at the same page of that book for 20 minutes, and you haven't turned it once." I felt my face go hot. Maybe I'm a slow reader. Maybe, he said, in a tone that made it very clear he didn't believe me, and went back to his own book like he hadn't just seen straight through me. But there was something in the way he said it, soft, almost pleased, that I turned over in my head for days afterward, looking for a meaning I was too scared to actually find. That was the thing about Roman. He noticed everything and said nothing, or noticed everything and said just enough to make me wonder if he'd noticed everything. By November, we had a routine. Late-night walks around the quad when neither of us could sleep, the kind where the cold made an excuse for walking close together, shoulders bumping, hands shoved in pockets that were somehow never quite far enough apart. Study sessions that dissolved into hours of talking about nothing. Favorite movies, worst fears, the aggressively mediocre dining hall tacos, what we wanted our lives to look like in 10 years. He wanted to travel, he said, somewhere with mountains. He wanted somebody to travel with, somebody who wouldn't get sick of him after the first week. I don't think that's possible, I said. Somebody getting sick of you, I mean. He looked at me for a long moment, longer than the joke deserved. The lamp light caught the side of his face, softened it. You'd be surprised, he said quietly, and didn't explain, and I didn't ask, because some part of me was afraid of what the answer might cost either of us. There was a night in late November I've replayed more times than I can count. It was maybe 1 a.m., both of us wired on caffeine and stress before a chemistry final, sitting on the floor with our backs against his bed, notes spread across the carpet between us. He'd been quizzing me, and I'd gotten something wrong for the third time, and he groaned and dropped his head back against the mattress, laughing. You're impossible, he said. You're a bad teacher. I'm an excellent teacher. You're just... He turned his head to look at me, and whatever he'd been about to say seemed to evaporate. We were close. Closer than the quiz required. Close enough that I could see the small scar above his eyebrow from some childhood bike accident he'd told me about weeks ago, close enough to count the shift in his breathing. Neither of us moved. The room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge and my own heartbeat, which felt loud enough to be a third person in the conversation. His eyes dropped, just briefly, to my mouth and came back up, and something in his expression cracked open into something I didn't have a name for yet. Something raw and a little scared and a little hopeful all at once. Elian, he said, so quiet was almost not a sound at all. I don't know what would have happened if my phone hadn't buzzed on the desk at that exact moment, shattering the stillness like a dropped glass. We both flinched back like we'd been caught at something, though neither of us had done anything at all. I fumbled for my phone, a notification, nothing important, and by the time I looked up again, Roman was already gathering his notes, laughing too brightly, saying something about needing sleep before the final. We didn't talk about it. Not that night, not the next day, not for weeks. But something had shifted, quiet and permanent, like a hairline crack in glass that you only notice when the light hits it a certain way. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the exhaustion and the caffeine and my own stupid hope had conjured a moment out of nothing. But then I'd catch him watching me across the room when he thought I wasn't looking, and I'd catch myself doing the same, and the air between our two beds started to feel like something with weight and texture, something you could almost touch. Christmas break separated us for 3 weeks, and I hated every day of it in a way that scared me. I kept picking up my phone to text him something and putting it back down, unsure what version of myself I was even allowed to be in those messages. When he texted first, a photo of his dog wearing a ridiculous sweater, captioned he says hi, and also that you're taking too long to reply to things in general. I laughed out loud in my empty room and felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in weeks. We texted every day after that. Stupid things, mostly. Memes. Complaints about family. Him sending me photos of terrible Christmas sweaters in store windows with captions like thoughts on this for the dorm room. Me sending back equally terrible commentary. It was easy, comfortable, the kind of easy that made the ache of missing him worse, not better, because it reminded me how much space he'd already taken up in my life without my permission. The night before we both flew back to campus, he texted, counting down the hours till I have to hear you breathe weird when you sleep again. I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes before responding, trying to parse whether it meant what I wanted it to mean, or whether I was doing the thing I always did, taking an ordinary sentence and building an entire cathedral of hope out of it. You want to talk? I wrote back finally. You talk in your sleep. Full conversations. You told your pillow it was being unreasonable last week. That's confidential information, Elian. I'm your roommate, not your lawyer. Fair. See you tomorrow. I missed you. Don't let that go to your head. I read that message probably 30 times before I fell asleep. I missed you. 3 words that shouldn't have meant anything, that people said to friends all the time, that I turned over and over in my hands like they were something precious and fragile, and possibly meant exactly what I was too afraid to hope they meant. When he walked back through our dorm room door in January, duffel bag over one shoulder, hair longer than I remembered, he looked at me for a second too long before he grinned and said, there he is, like I was something he'd been looking forward to finding. I didn't know it yet, standing there in the cold January light with my heart doing something complicated and unfamiliar in my chest, but that semester was going to break something open in both of us. It was going to take almost losing each other before either of us said the thing we'd both been too scared to say since that night in November. Notes spread across the carpet, his eyes dropping to my mouth and then away. But that January afternoon, all I knew was this. Roman Ashworth had walked back into my life, and some quiet, terrified, hopeful part of me had already decided it never wanted him to walk back out of it. January settled back into a rhythm faster than I expected, though nothing about it felt quite the same as before break. There was a new awareness humming underneath every ordinary moment. The way Roman would toss a shirt at me from across the room, and our fingers would brush when I caught it. The way he'd started sitting closer on the couch in the common lounge when we watched movies with the rest of the floor, close enough that his knee pressed against mine and neither of us moved away. I told myself I was reading into things. I told myself that so many times it had become a kind of prayer, something I repeated to keep myself from hoping too hard and getting wrecked when I was wrong. Then Marcus showed up. Marcus was a junior, tall, and confident in the effortless way that comes from never once doubting your welcome in a room, and he'd apparently decided sometime over winter break that Roman was worth pursuing. He started appearing at our door under increasingly thin pretexts, needing to borrow a charger, wanted to talk about a class he and Roman didn't actually share, inviting him to parties with a hand on his shoulder that lingered a beat too long. "He's harmless," Roman said, the first time I brought it up, trying to sound casual and mostly succeeding. "Just friendly." "Sure," I said, and went back to my textbook and did not look up for the rest of the night because I was afraid of what my face might give away. I want to be honest about what jealousy felt like, because nobody warns you it isn't dramatic. It isn't slammed doors or shouted accusations. It's quieter and uglier than that. It's laughing at a joke a half second too late because you were busy watching someone else laugh at it first. It's going quiet during dinner because Marcus texted and Roman's face did something soft and pleased reading it. It's lying awake in the bottom bunk listening to Roman's breathing even out above you and hating yourself for the shape your thoughts had taken. Hating that you had no right to feel this way about a boy who had never once said he wanted you the way you wanted him. I didn't say anything. That was the problem, looking back. I didn't say anything because saying something meant admitting there was something to say, and admitting that meant risking the only version of him I currently had, which was warm and close and mine in every way except the one that mattered. So instead, I got quieter. I stopped joining the late-night walks, told him I had too much reading. I started leaving the room before he woke up and coming back after he'd fallen asleep. A coward schedule, engineered so carefully around avoiding him that it took him almost 2 weeks to corner me about it. "Okay, what did I do?" he asked one Thursday evening, blocking the doorway with his arms crossed when I tried to slip out toward the library. "Nothing. I just have a lot of work." "Elian." His voice had an edge I'd never heard him use with me before. Not angry, exactly, but hurt, and trying hard not to show it. "You've barely looked at me in 2 weeks. I'm not stupid. Something happened, and I don't know what, and it's driving me insane." I stood there with my bag on my shoulder, and for one reckless second, I almost told him everything. The words were right there, crowding my throat. "It's not you. It's that I watch you with Marcus, and I want to put my fist through a wall. It's that I think about you when I shouldn't. It's that I've been in love with you since approximately the 3rd week of September, and I don't know how to keep sharing a room with you without it destroying me." What I said instead was, "I'm distressed. It's not about you." He looked at me for a long moment, and something in his face closed, just slightly, like a door easing shut. "Okay," he said, quiet. "If you say so." He moved out of the doorway. I left, and something between us, some fragile architecture we'd spent months building without ever naming it, cracked a little further. The distance got worse before it got better. We became polite in a way that hurt more than fighting would have. Careful, measured, the kind of roommate arrangement where you both know the schedule of the other person's classes specifically so you can avoid overlapping in a room. He started spending more evenings out, presumably with Marcus, though I never let myself ask, and he never offered. I told myself this was fine. I told myself a lot of things that winter that weren't true. It was Priya, a girl from my econ class who'd somehow become the closest thing I had to a confidant that semester who finally said out loud what I'd been too afraid to say to myself. "You're in love with your roommate," she said, not even looking up from her coffee, like she was commenting on the weather. I nearly choked. I don't. Elian, you talk about him more than any of my actual friends talk about their actual boyfriends. You lit up for a solid 10 minutes, describing the specific way he organizes his laundry, which, by the way, is not a normal thing to find endearing unless you're in love with someone. I don't even know if I stopped because the sentence I'd been about to say was a lie, and something about her steady, unbothered gaze made lying feel pointless. Okay, maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. So what are you going to do about it? Nothing, I said. He's probably with Marcus. And even if he's not, I don't even know if I've never actually told anyone I'm. The word stuck in my throat, 3 letters I'd never once said out loud to another human being, and Priya just waited, patient, unhurried, letting me get there on my own time. Gay, I finally said, barely above a whisper, like the dining hall might collapse around me for saying it. She smiled, small and warm. Congratulations. The world didn't end. It might when I have to actually deal with the Roman situation. So deal with it. Worst case, he doesn't feel the same way and it's awkward for a while. Best case, she shrugged, like the best case was so obviously worth the risk that it didn't need finishing. I didn't deal with it. Not then. I went back to the dorm that night, rehearsing 100 versions of a conversation I didn't have the courage to start, and found Roman sitting on his bed, laptop open, headphones around his neck, looking up when I came in with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said back, and the space between those 2 words felt like a canyon. I don't know exactly when the ice started thawing again. It wasn't one conversation. It was a slow accumulation of small ones. Him leaving my favorite candy bar on my desk with no note, like an apology he couldn't quite voice. Me laughing at something he said in the hallway before I remembered I was supposed to be keeping my distance. Small offerings, testing the water, both of us circling the same unspoken thing from opposite sides. Then came the night, everything nearly changed. It was early March, unseasonably warm, and the floor was throwing an impromptu party in the common room to celebrate someone's birthday. I hadn't planned on going, hadn't planned on much of anything that semester except surviving it. But Priya dragged me along, and somewhere around 11, I found myself on the balcony outside the common room, alone, needing air, needing distance from the noise and the crowd and the exhausting effort of pretending to be fine. The door slid open behind me a few minutes later, and I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. I could feel it, the particular way the air shifted when Roman entered a space, something I'd apparently become so attuned to that my body registered it before my mind caught up. "Hiding?" he asked, coming to stand beside me at the railing, close enough that our arms almost touched. "Recharging," I said. "Introvert math. 2 hours of people costs 1 hour of silence." He laughed, soft, and for a moment it felt like November again, like nothing between us had ever gone quiet or careful. The party noise spilled out muffled behind the glass door, and the cold made his cheeks pink, and I was aware of every inch of space between his hand on the railing and mine. "I saw Marcus inside," I said before I could stop myself, testing something I didn't fully understand. Roman was quiet for a second. "Yeah, he asked me out, actually, a couple weeks ago." My stomach dropped through the floor of the balcony. "Oh," I said no. He was looking at the string lights someone had hung along the railing, not at me. I told him I was interested in someone else. The world went very still. "Someone else?" I repeated, my voice coming out smaller than I meant it to. "Yeah." He finally turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the party behind us, his expression was open in a way I hadn't seen since November, scared and hopeful in equal measure. "Elian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer me honestly, because I've spent 2 months trying to read your mind, and I'm exhausted." My heart was doing something violent against my ribs. "Okay." That night before the chem final, in November, he took a breath. "I almost kissed you. I've thought about it basically every day since. And then you got weird and distant for weeks, and I convinced myself I'd made it up, imagined the whole thing, and I felt like an idiot. And then just now I made a joke about it being introvert math, and you laughed at me the way you used to, and I need to know if I'm crazy. Am I crazy? The party noise seemed to fade into nothing. It was just the two of us, the cold air, the string lights, 3 months of careful avoidance collapsing in real time. You're not crazy, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. Something in his face broke open, relief and terror and hope all tangled together. Then why did you pull away? Why the 2 weeks of barely looking at me? Because Marcus was around, and you seemed happy, and I didn't think I had any right to feel the way I felt about it, I said, the words tumbling out now that the dam had cracked, months of held breath finally releasing. Because I've never told anyone I'm gay, not once, not out loud, and the first person I was ever going to say it to was you, and I was terrified of what it would cost me if you didn't feel the same way. He was closer now. I hadn't seen him move, but he was closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off him in the cold March air. Elian, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on my name in a way that undid something in my chest. I have never in my life wanted anything the way I want to kiss you right now. So why haven't you? I whispered. Because I need you to be sure. Because once I do this, I don't want to go back to whatever careful, polite thing we've been doing for 2 months. I need to know you want this too. I want this, I said, and my voice didn't shake at all, because for the first time in months, I was finally completely certain of something. I've wanted this since September. I've wanted this since you walked in with your stupid suitcase and made a joke about serial killers. He laughed, a startled, disbelieving sound, and then his hand came up to my jaw, gentle, questioning, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't pull away. I leaned in instead, closing the last impossible inch of distance between us, and when our lips finally met it felt less like a beginning and more like something that had already been true for months, finally allowed to exist out loud. It wasn't long, a soft, careful kiss, both of us too aware of the party happening feet away behind glass, too aware of everything we were risking and everything we were finally choosing. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere instead of simply standing still. Okay, he said, a little breathless, a little wondering. That was okay. That was worth 2 months of you being weird to me. I laughed, and for the first time since November, it didn't feel complicated. It just felt like relief. But I want to be honest about something, because this isn't a story that ends easily just because 2 people finally kiss on a balcony. What came after that night was not simple. There was still Marcus, hurt and confused, still around the floor for weeks afterward. There was still the terrifying prospect of telling anyone else. Friends back home, family, the wider world that neither of us had come out to yet. There was still an entire spring semester of learning how to be honest with each other after months of practice silence. And one particular night, in April, where everything nearly fell apart entirely, a misunderstanding so painful I almost lost him for good before I understood what honesty was actually going to cost me. But that night on the balcony, cold air, string lights, his hand on my jaw, and his forehead against mine. That was the night I stopped being afraid of what I felt for him. That was the night I finally let myself believe that maybe, against every quiet fear I'd carried since childhood, I was allowed to have this. Nobody tells you that the hardest part of finally being honest with one person is figuring out how honest to be with everyone else. That's what the weeks after the balcony taught me. That a single kiss doesn't undo 18 years of silence. It just gives you a reason to finally start breaking it, one terrifying conversation at a time. We didn't tell people right away. That wasn't shame, exactly, or it was but a specific kind, the kind that comes from never having practiced the words before. We told Priya first over coffee, and she just smiled and said, finally, like she'd been waiting on us to catch up to something she'd known for months. We told a few close floor friends after that, carefully, watching their faces for the flicker of rejection I'd been bracing for my whole life. It never came. Mostly people just looked mildly amused that it had taken us so long. What we didn't do, not yet, was tell our families. Roman's situation was complicated. His father was a quiet, old-fashioned man who Roman described as not cruel, just closed, someone who'd need time and careful handling. Mine was different. My mother, specifically, was the reason the word gay had lived so long unspoken in my chest. Not because she'd ever said anything hateful, but because of a comment she'd made once, offhand, about a cousin who'd come out, something about hoping it was just a phase that had lodged itself in me at 14 and never fully worked its way loose. Spring semester became this strange, beautiful, fragile thing. Stolen moments between classes, hands finding each other under the table at the dining hall when nobody was looking, movie nights that dissolved in a slow, unhurried kissing on the small dorm couch. Both of us laughing between kisses because neither of us could quite believe we were allowed to do this now. I had never been happier in my life. I want that on record before I tell you what happened in April, because it's important to know how good things were before they nearly weren't. The trouble started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. It was a Tuesday night in mid-April, and I'd come back from the library early, and Roman was on the phone in our room with the door half closed, his voice low and tight in a way I didn't recognize. I stopped in the hallway, not quite eavesdropping, not quite not. "I don't know, Dad," he was saying, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. "I'm not. No, there's nobody. I told you, there's nobody like that." I stood frozen in the hallway, my chest going hollow and cold. "There's nobody like that." For words, and every fear I'd spent months trying not to feel came roaring back at once. That this had been temporary for him, a phase, something easy to fold up small the second it became inconvenient. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that when I finally pushed the door open, my face must have given something away, because Roman's expression shifted the second he saw me. Phone still pressed to his ear. "You got to go, Dad." "Yeah, talk soon." He hung up fast, too fast, and that only made it worse. "Hey, you're back early. There's nobody like that," I repeated, my voice flat and strange to my own ears. "That's what you told him." His face went pale. "Elian, it's not what it—" "Don't," I said, and I could hear my voice starting to shake, could feel 3 months of hard-won openness curdling back into the old familiar fear. "Don't tell me it's not what it sounded like, because I heard exactly what it sounded like. I'm nobody. That's what I am to you when it actually matters, when your dad actually asks. That's not fair, isn't it?" The hurt was coming out as anger now, ugly and fast, the way it does when you've spent your whole life swallowing feelings and they finally find an exit. "I told you things I've never told anyone. I said the word gay out loud for the first time in my life on that balcony, because of you. And you can't even tell your own father I exist? It's not that simple." His voice cracked, and I hated that some part of me softened at the sound of it even while I was furious. "My dad and I told you it's complicated with him. I can't just—" "You don't have to tell him everything. You could have said there's someone, it's private, I'm not ready to talk about it." You could have said literally anything that wasn't erasing me completely. My eyes were stinging now, and I hated that too, hated crying in front of him when I was trying to be angry. Instead, you made me sound like I don't exist. Like this whole thing is nothing. "You're not nothing," he said, and he reached for me, and I stepped back before I could stop myself. "I need space," I said, grabbing my jacket, my keys, anything I could use as an excuse to be somewhere he wasn't. "I can't do this right now. Elian." I left. I didn't look back at his face, though I could feel him standing in the doorway watching me go, and some small, cruel part of me was glad, because for months I'd been the one left standing in doorways watching him leave, and it seemed, in that moment, like a kind of justice. I walked for almost 2 hours that night. No destination, just cold air and city streets, and the particular loneliness of being hurt by the one person who'd made you feel less alone than you'd ever felt in your life. I thought about calling Priya. I thought about calling my mother, which was almost funny, given that she was the last person who could possibly help me through something like this. Mostly I just walked, replaying the phone call over and over, turning "there's nobody like that" into 100 different knives. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until almost a week later, after 4 days of him texting apologies, I was too hurt and too stubborn to answer. After a week of the dorm room, feeling like the coldest place on earth despite being the same size it had always been, was what had actually happened on that call before I walked in. I found out from Priya, of all people, who'd heard it secondhand from a mutual friend Roman had confided in, because he hadn't been able to bring himself to say it to me directly yet, too afraid I'd already decided to hate him. His father hadn't been asking a casual question. He'd been circling something specific, a rumor, apparently, that I'd reach him through a family friend whose kid went to our school, a rumor about the roommate situation that had made him suspicious enough to call and probe. And Roman, caught completely off guard, panicking, not ready. Not ready in the way that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with fear, had lied on instinct, the way you flinch away from a flame before you've even registered the heat. It didn't make it okay. I want to be honest about that too, because this isn't a story about how love excuses everything. It hurt, and it was allowed to hurt, and Roman never once tried to tell me it shouldn't have. But understanding it changed something in me, softened the sharp edges of my anger into something closer to grief. Grief for how hard this still was for both of us, how much fear we were both still carrying even after everything. He found me on the 5th day, sitting alone on a bench near the quad, the same quad we used to walk around late at night, when neither of us could sleep. He sat down beside me without asking, careful, like he expected me to get up and leave. "I'm not going to make excuses," he said, before I could say anything at all. What I said was wrong. You deserved so much better than being erased like that, and I know sorry doesn't fix it, but I need you to know I'm sorry. Not just for the words, for not being brave enough yet. You've been braver than me this whole time, and I let you find that out in the worst possible way. I didn't say anything for a long moment, watching a group of freshmen toss a frisbee badly across the grass. Buy myself time to find words that wouldn't just come out as more hurt. "I'm scared too," I finally said. "You know that, right? I haven't told my mom. I don't know when I will, or if I will, honestly, not for a long time. I understand being scared, Roman. I understand it better than almost anyone could. What I don't understand is you making me disappear to manage your fear instead of just telling me you needed time." I know. His voice was rough. I panicked. It wasn't about you not matching. It was about me not being ready for the conversation, and I took that fear and I put it on you instead of owning it. And that's not okay, and I'm not going to do it again. How do I know that? He was quiet for a second, and then he pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a text, drafted but not yet sent, addressed to his father. I read it twice before I fully understood what I was looking at. "Dad, I lied to you on the phone last week. There is someone. His name is Elian. He's my roommate, and I'm in love with him, and I should have said that instead of pretending he doesn't exist. I know this might be hard for you to hear. I'm not asking you to be okay with it today. I'm just done lying about it. I haven't sent it yet," he said quietly. "I wanted to talk to you first. I wanted you to know it exists, that I wrote it, that I meant every word of it. But I also don't want to send something that big without you knowing first because it affects you too, and I don't get to make decisions like that without you again." I looked up at him, and the anger that had been sitting in my chest for 5 days finally, quietly, began to dissolve into something gentler. "You're really going to send that? When you tell me it's okay?" "Not before." He looked at me, steady despite the nerves clearly written across his face. "Elian, I don't want to hide this. I don't want to hide you. I was an idiot for one phone call, and I'm going to spend a long time making up for it if that's what it takes. But I need you to know that phone call is not who I actually am. Who I actually am is the guy who wants to walk across this campus holding your hand without flinching. I just need you to still want that with me." The frisbee thumped against the grass a few feet away, and one of the freshmen laughed, and somewhere a long way off a bell tower struck the hour, and none of it mattered at all compared to the boy sitting beside me on that bench, offering me his fear and his apology and his whole unfinished, imperfect self all at once. "Send it," I said quietly. "Not because I need proof, because I think you need to stop being afraid, and I don't want you carrying that alone anymore." He sent it. We sat there together while the reply bubble appeared and disappeared several times on his father's end, agonizing, and then finally a message came back. Not perfect, not entirely accepting, but not the rejection either of us had braced for. "We should talk. I love you. Give me some time to understand." It wasn't everything, but it was a door left open instead of slammed shut, and after everything, that felt like more than enough for one day. Roman looked up from the phone, eyes bright, and reached for my hand right there on the bench, in front of the freshmen and the frisbee and the whole indifferent, ordinary campus around us. I let him take it. For the first time since that phone call, it didn't feel like something to be afraid of. It just felt like coming home. Part 4. Summer arrived faster than either of us expected. The way endings and beginnings always seem to sneak up on you when you're too busy living inside a moment to notice the calendar turning. By May, something between Roman and me had settled into a kind of quiet certainty. Not effortless, exactly, because nothing about loving someone in the open for the first time is effortless, but solid. Tested. The kind of certain that only comes after you've actually weathered something together and come out the other side, still holding hands. His father's "give me some time" turned into a real conversation over spring break. One Roman came back from looking lighter than I'd seen him look all year. Not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because the truth was finally sitting in the open air instead of buried under years of careful omission. His dad hadn't thrown a parade, but he'd asked, haltingly, what my favorite class was. He'd asked, even more haltingly, if I made his son happy. Roman said yes before the question had even finished leaving his father's mouth, and something about the speed of that answer had made the older man laugh. Actually laugh, for the first time in the whole conversation. He's not going to be perfect about it right away, Roman told me afterward, lying with his head on my chest in the dim evening light of our dorm room. The semester winding down around us in stacks of finished textbooks and half-packed boxes. But he didn't say no. For him, that's practically a parade. I still hadn't told my mother. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where every thread resolves into a bow. Some things take longer. Some doors open slower than others, and I'd learned enough that spring to know there was no shame in that. That courage doesn't have a deadline, and that the version of bravery that mattered most wasn't the loudest one. It was the one that showed up honestly, in its own time, at its own pace. What I did do, on the last true week of the semester, was walk across the quad in the golden early evening light, Roman's hand in mine, in front of anyone who cared to look. Nobody stared. Nobody said anything at all, actually, which somehow felt like the biggest miracle of the entire year. The sheer unremarkable ordinariness of two boys holding hands on a college quad, sunlight catching in his hair, laughter easy between us the way it had been that very first day. Except now, it meant something neither of us had to hide. We ended up back at the same balcony, the one from March, empty this time, the party long since packed away into memory. The string lights were gone, taken down for the season, but the view was the same, the quad stretching out below us, students moving between buildings, the whole ordinary rhythm of a place that had somehow become the site of the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to me. "Remember what I asked you here?" Roman said, leaning against the railing, watching me with that same open, unguarded expression he'd worn the night everything changed. "You asked if you were crazy," I said. "You said no." He reached for my hand again, lacing our fingers together like it was the easiest thing in the world, because by then, it finally was. "I have a new question." "Okay, move in with me next year. Off campus. There's a place 2 blocks from here. Priya's already looked at it with us. It's got terrible water pressure and a landlord who yells at the mailman, but it's got a balcony too, and I think I'd like to spend a year waking up next to you, instead of 10 feet away in a bunk bed." I laughed, and it came out a little wet, because somewhere in the last 9 months, I'd apparently become someone who cried at good things too, not just bad ones. "You had this whole speech planned." "I had this whole speech planned since March," he admitted. "I just needed you to be sure first." "I think we're both sure now." "We're sure," I said, and kissed him there on the balcony where it had all started, the late spring air warm against us instead of cold. Nothing careful or frightened about it this time. Just 2 boys who'd spent a whole terrifying, beautiful year learning how to stop hiding from each other, finally standing in the open, exactly where they wanted to be. I think about that suitcase sometimes, the sound of its wheels on the hallway tile, the boy who walked through my door and joked about serial killers and completely rearranged the shape of my life without either of us realizing it was happening. I think about how close I came to spending that whole year invisible, quiet, folded up small the way I'd been folding myself since I was 14 years old. I think about how it was Roman, loud, warm, relentlessly present Roman, who taught me that being seen wasn't the danger I'd always believed it was. That sometimes being seen, fully, by the right person is the safest thing in the entire world. We moved into that apartment with the terrible water pressure the following August. The balcony, it turns out, gets excellent light in the evenings. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And let me know in the comments, should I tell you what happened after they moved in together? Because trust me, that's a whole story of its own.